what you want to talk about, the unconscious and the symptom. These are terrific topics. These are core concepts. Lacan famously chose 4 fundamental concepts, and you know that the unconscious was one of them. Symptom could have been one of them. And I suspect had he delivered seminar 11 at the end of the 1960s, symptom may have been one of them. This is something that we've been talking a lot about in this learning community that many of you probably already know of, called Lectures on Lacan. You can find us on Substack, you can find us on Instagram, you can track us down with the internet search. Substack is the best way to stay in touch with Lectures on Lacan. It's basically a free newsletter. It's no cost to join, and you just get updated on stuff. And then we have lots of lecture series and things like this get advertised. But right now in Lectures on Lacan, we're studying Lacan's later work. We are in the mid-1970s looking at Seminar 22. Lectures on Lacan began with Seminar 10, and we've been steadily working our way forward. Throughout this process, the unconscious and the symptom have been focal points. And in Seminar 22, in fact, I just met with the group on Friday, and you all are still welcome to join. Just go to our Substack and you can learn all about this new series we're doing. Just Friday, we were talking about the symptom. And in our next series of get-togethers, it will also be on the symptom. Because in Seminar 22, Lacan is still on the topic. He says, a symptom is an ellipsis, ... He also there, in a passage that should be made famous, a symptom is a woman. So my next 2 lectures in this lecture series on Seminar 22 are on symptoms, symptom as ellipsis and symptom as woman. So the timing to get together and to join your caravan to discuss the symptom sounds great. It works perfectly for what I've been thinking about recently. However, in order to understand the symptom, and here I'm just going to assume that we're all beginners and working through this stuff, we have to first account for the unconscious. The unconscious is what commands the symptom. Lacan is pretty clear about this throughout his early 1970s work. However, in order to account for the unconscious, we have to take one step further back and understand what Lacan means by knowledge. Now, this may sound kind of odd, and I was thinking last night as I was kind of in and out of sleep most of the night, and it struck me that psychoanalysis as a clinical technique, it is not premised on knowledge of the unconscious. Psychoanalysis as a therapeutic technique is premised on faith in the unconscious. And I hadn't thought of it this way, because for Lacan, the unconscious is a field of knowledge. It's a certain type of knowledge. It's a field of unknown knowledge, as we're going to see. But in the clinic, and I learned this from a Lebanese psychoanalyst who is a member of the Lectures on Lacan community and is in our series, and who was speaking about this on Friday in our discussion, so just the day before yesterday. And he talked about his work with various neurotics. And he says he lets them arrive in the clinic. They start talking and they talk and they talk and they talk until there's a silence. At which point he says the analysand expects him to fill the silence. He says he does not fill the silence. The silence sits, and eventually the analysand starts talking again. And I asked, well, so when do you speak up? When do you make a statement in the clinic? And his response was, not when, but what do I say? And he told the group that when he speaks up with an analysand, specifically a classic Lacanian subject, a neurotic subject, he says he tries to limit his words only to what the analysand has already said. So the other day he said an analysand showed up and said, I had a dream last night and you're going to like this one. And his response was, I'm going to like this one. Truly interesting for me to think that the words he would choose would be those of the analysand. Now, this analyst, some of you may know him, is incredibly smart. He has a lot to say, but he limits what he says to what he hears from the analysand. I can't help but look at this and see it as an act of faith. Faith that with time, the unconscious wills out. Faith that if they just keep going, unconscious truth will eventually make itself heard. Unconscious truth makes itself heard by way of symptom. And before we get started, I want to be really clear about this. Not every utterance is symptomatic. And not every parapraxis is a symptom. Just because you forget someone's name, just because you have a slip of the tongue, just because you fidget a little bit once when you talk about your mother, that doesn't make it a symptom. A symptom is a lapsus or a slip that repeats. A symptom is a lapsus or slip commanded by the unconscious. Not every slip of the tongue is a symptom. So symptom, if you want to think about this, there's everyday speech. There are the various slips and stutters that characterize everyday speech, hesitations, corrections, what conversation analysts call parapraxis. And then there is the symptom at the top, which is a particular acute expression that repeats. I bring all this up to start before we've even discussed symptom, unconscious, knowledge, because I want to lead not with knowledge, but with faith. This analyst taught me on Friday that to be a Lacanian psychoanalyst is not just to know something of the unconscious and its various formations, but to have faith in the unconscious. The unconscious is the God of Lacanian psychoanalysis. It is what we have faith in, and it is what never shows up. The symptom is what shows up. The unconscious is what does not show up. The unconscious remains. And no matter how much work you do in analysis, the unconscious remains. And I can't help but think that part of what occurs at the end of analysis is a type of fidelity. Not just to oneself and not just to one's partner, but fidelity to one's unconscious. To have completed an analysis is to become a man or woman of faith. I want to start there so that we can have this in the background. Faith in the unconscious is what Lacan teaches us. Now, I want to shift to the more boring topic of knowledge. You see, knowledge is not quite the same as faith, despite the pistis in epistemology. Don't forget what pistis means. Don't forget about the Greek lexical history of the word epistemology. Epistemology has to do with belief. There is an element of faith that knowledge brings with it. But let's be more basic than this. Let's see if we can just get a really clean understanding of what Lacan is doing with this unknown knowledge that is the unconscious, so that we can then have a better, clearer understanding of what he's doing with the symptom. So if you've got pen and paper, I would advise you to draw like a series of little family trees. I'm going to give you a series of distinctions, almost like an Aristotelian uncovering of this stuff. We start with knowledge because that helps us understand the unconscious. And then we go to the unconscious because that helps us understand the symptom. So first, knowledge. For Lacan, broadly speaking, and that's how I'm going to speak today, knowledge comes in two forms. There is known knowledge and unknown knowledge. Knowledge that is known, Lacan refers to as enunciated knowledge. Or if you want to be playful with it, you could call it conscious knowledge. Known knowledge is knowledge we know, that we are aware of, that we are cognizant of. And the word for this that Lacan gives us in Seminar 20, which I think is very useful here, he calls it enunciated knowledge. It is knowledge pronounced, written down, inscribed. Enunciated knowledge is known knowledge that is structured atop language and results in the production of meaning. So if you have two elements that you want to add to this, known knowledge is enunciated knowledge, and it's structured atop language, and it results in the production of meaning. Meaning is what we make using enunciated knowledge. So for example, when you open a dictionary, when you peek into an encyclopedia, what you're doing is you are using language which has given you a sense of conscious knowledge to produce, maintain, and ingest meaning. Meaning is what you see when you look into the dictionary. And let me emphasize this medial point because it is quite important. Enunciated knowledge is fundamentally visual knowledge. It's what we see when we peek into the dictionary. It has more to do with the eye than it does with the ear. You'll see why this is important in a second. Unknown knowledge, this other type of knowledge that Lacan gives us, is unconscious knowledge. So enunciated knowledge is known. Unconscious knowledge is unknown knowledge. It's a kind of savoir-faire. It's a knowing how to do stuff with something of which you're unaware. The unconscious knows how to do things. And if you like your speech act theory, the unconscious knows how to do things with words. However, the unconscious is not structured atop language. Language is just part of what the unconscious draws upon. More primarily, the unconscious is structured atop la langue. La language. You've heard probably some talk of this among Lacanians. Language for Lacan is what we try to know about la langue. Language is what words mean on the page. La langue has to do with how words sound when we say them. Right? Right. Write this down. Make sure that this rite of passage is complete. To understand Lacan rightly, you must write down everything we say. You see? Write, write, and write. They all sound precisely the same. In the dictionary, R-I-T-E, like a rite of passage, is not next to the word W-R-I-T-E. In the field of language, their relation is wildly differential. In the field of la langue, where homophony is what matters, right and right are not just next to each other, they are identical. They are on top of each other. If you want to know what it's like in the unconscious, this is what it's like. Words that sound the same, look the same. Belly and deli may also be right on top of each other. And it might not even be the words themselves. It could be just a letter from a word. The E in deli and the B in belly could be the very thing that allows, like a crossword puzzle, belly and deli to connect in the unconscious. But note this, language is a visual enterprise. Meaning making, we use our eyes for this. La langue, which is what the unconscious knows how to work with, is oral. It has to do with how words are said and how they sound. We don't use our eyes. The unconscious is an ear. If known knowledge is structured atop language, unknown knowledge, the unconscious, is structured atop la langue. If known knowledge results in the production of meaning, unknown knowledge results in the production of symptoms. Not meaning, but symptoms. Not dictionary definitions, but homophonic resonance. We are not dealing with fixations of sense, which is what you see in the dictionary, but polysemous flurries of nonsense. This is what the unconscious as an unknown field of knowledge produces. Are you ready to draw more of this family tree? Let's split it again.
Professor McCormick, do
Yeah.
you want to see your screen if that would make it better?
It's okay.
All right.
Thank you for offering, though. As some of you know, if you've ever attended our discussions, I spend a lot of time using this, my pen tab. Lots of colorful images, lots of diagrams. The only reason I would want to share my screen now is to show you what we came up with on Friday. Do you want to see? Do you want to see the diagram we were working with on Friday? Okay. Then yes, my good friend, I would love to share my screen. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this.
Also,
Okay,
you're
Am I
doing
sharing
that.
it?
Not yet. We'll see. We'll let you know. Just wanted to tell everybody, if you can pause for questions for a bit. We'll have after professor's done with their material, we'll do the questions. You can wait for a bit. You're sharing your screen now. We can see it.
Okay, so what do you see? Should I be concerned? What do you see? I have no idea.
We see the Google Meet for now. You can switch
Okay.
your window and then we'll be able to see the diagram. Yeah.
Let's see. Where the hell is that diagram? Let's see if this might be it. Oh, hey, do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. This is what we were working on Friday. Now, I'm not going to explain all of this. This is well beyond what we're going to talk about today. You see the Borromean knot, right? I have no idea what you can see.
We
Do you
were
see
able
my...
to see the Borromean knot.
We see the Borromean knot. Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you for confirming. This is what will happen if you continue to let me share my screen. If you continue to let me share my screen, I will start drawing, I will start writing, and I will start marking little arrows. You see this one here? This was discussion of a particular clinical moment, work with a particular patient, someone who showed up with body image issues, worked that into a symbolic deciphering. Then in the analysis went to a more real encounter with their bioanimal life. And then through feminine enjoyment, at the end of the analysis, arrived at a healthier image of their own body. That's a very quick and dirty explanation, but that's what that little white arrow is. And I think I can stop sharing now because I don't want to do all that here. What I want to do instead is something more Aristotelian. I want to talk and I want you to write. And I want you to think of this as things kind of like branching out, like a tree branch. I want you to do the drawing this time. I want you to do the writing this time. Why? Because psychoanalytic theory for Lacan begins when you start writing. Psychoanalytic practice begins when you start speaking. Speech is the medium for the clinic, but the pen and paper, these are media for the office, for the case note, for the theoretical work. Lacan's chalkboard is where theory occurs. His classroom is where the analysand speaks. And that's how he thought of himself. It's kind of imitating an analysand when he taught. But I didn't come to talk to you about that. What I want to do next is tell you how unknown unconscious knowledge is itself subdivided. Once more, there are two types of unconscious knowledge. Some of you have heard this before, so I'll try and be a little brief with this. The first type of unconscious knowledge in Lacan's thought is knowable unconscious knowledge. This is unconscious knowledge that can be said and thus can enter the field of enunciated knowledge. It can become meaningful. It can become sensible. It can become known. And this all too often is what we think psychoanalysis amounts to. We hystericize neurotic analysands using the discourse of the hysteric, if you remember my lectures on these or how the discourse of the hysteric is written. And through this process of hystericization, the analysand interrogates their symptoms and comes to terms with them, assigns them meaning. When the analysand makes their nonsensical symptoms sensible, assigning meaning or sens to them, this shows that the type of unconscious that commanded that symptom was a knowable unconscious. There are unconscious truths in you that can become known, that can become legible, that you can learn about. And that's the first type of unconscious truth. Some are knowable. This is unconscious truth that can be made to exist in the symbolic. If you want it in a line, it's this. The first type of unconscious knowledge is unconscious knowledge that can become conscious or enunciated knowledge. And that means that there are unconscious truths in you that can be made to exist in the symbolic. Now, if we're going to continue this trajectory, I speak, you write, the second part or branch of unconscious knowledge for Lacan is not knowable, but unknowable. There is a field of unconscious knowledge which far outweighs the former, that cannot be known. Why? Because it cannot be said. Knowable unconscious truths are those which can be said and thus become known. Unknowable unconscious truths are those that cannot become known because they cannot be said. They elude capture by enunciated knowledge. And thus, these unknowable unconscious truths, they remain unknown, meaningless, absent from the field of sense and sensibility. The sense of these unconscious truths is absence. Clinically, this would be expressions that are impervious to hystericization and its attendant process of meaning making. So if you want to jump into the weeds with the discourse of the hysteric, this is not the circuit of surplus enjoyment between slashed S, S1, and S2 in the hysterics discourse. You just got to write out the hysterics discourse and you'll see the agent addressing an other, which is their symptom, in order to arrive at some sort of insight or knowledge to its meaning. There's the S2 as the product of that discourse. Here, though, in the field of unknown unconscious knowledge, what we would be more focused on is the enigmatic, unspeakable little a that the hystericized analysand, that slashed S in the hysterics discourse, cannot quite fathom, cannot quite account for, cannot make sense of. Again, just write the hysterics discourse, and you'll see in the lower left-hand corner is a little a that signifies the unknowable unconscious truth that governs the discourse of the hysteric, even and especially in the clinic when they are interrogating their symptoms in search of meaning. Well, what about that little a? At what point does that become an object of inquiry in the clinic? Let me try and be clear with all this. What we're looking at when we talk about unknowable unconscious knowledge is unconscious truth that does not exist in the symbolic, but instead exists there, beyond the symbolic, but insisting within it, a without, within. Here, we see unconscious truth as a whole in the symbolic. And this, I think, is one of the most elusive aspects of Lacanian thought. How is the hole in the torus connected to the Am I back? That is a
Yes.
powerful, that's a powerful universal mute. The universal mute. I love it, you know. I like an indiscriminate mute. That the idiot that won't stop talking also gets muted, along with the genius who's been silent for the past 15 or 20 minutes. You want a good indiscriminate mute, right? That's the mute of justice. Justice is about equality, all treated fairly. Idiots and wizards alike. Okay, I'm glad that we're back. I don't think the point here is one that we can really get into today, maybe in the discussion. But in the symbolic, there's always a whole. And that whole shares a contour with what is also beyond the symbolic. And this is why the real is such an elusive phenomenon for everyone who reads Lacan. It's connected to the whole inside the symbolic and the existent field beyond it. We can talk about that later in the Q&A, or we can talk about that in lectures on Lacan. Maybe not right here, but if you want to, we certainly can. So put a bookmark in that one. I bring all this up, these two types of knowledge, and then these two types of unconscious knowledge, because I want to say that for unconscious knowledge, whether it's knowable or unknowable, the medium for it is the same, the symptom. The symptom is the medium for knowable and unknowable unconscious truth. But again, there are two different types of symptoms. And this is where things are going to get a little challenging. But thankfully, also, this is the final main point I want to make. When it comes to unconscious knowledge, we often see two different types of symptoms. Some symptoms, which correspond to knowable unconscious truths, correspond to what is said when the analysand speaks. And I'm using that expression very carefully. What is said when the analysand speaks? A symptom can be what is said when the analysand speaks. But a symptom can also be the event of saying itself. Not what is said, not the word you chose, but the fact that you opened your mouth, pushed air up, and vocalized something. These are two different aspects of the symptom. There's what you have said, and then there is the act and fact of saying. For Lacan, in the 1970s, these two things are different. The said is not the saying. Let me try and sharpen this up a little bit because it's a really important distinction. Knowable unconscious truths, they enter the symbolic by way of symptomatic saids. Here, the focus is on what is said when the analysand speaks. For instance, you heard me say belly instead of deli. How about if you heard me in analysis say sister instead of Mr., where Mr. would have been the appropriate word? I said sister instead. Here you're focused on what I have said, the word choice, the lexical content of my utterance. In each case, we ask the question, what does that mean? What does it mean, McCormick, when you said sister instead of Mr.? What does it mean? There are symptoms that incline us toward meaning. This puts us squarely in the realm of language use, which is a realm that Lacan calls the dimension of the symbolic. And I emphasize that D part, spelled D-I-T, mention. And I'm pronouncing it in the French dimension. The reason why this matters is that D-I-T is the French word that means said. Language for Lacan, whether we're talking about a dictionary or an encyclopedia, is the dimension of the symbolic. It's where all the stuff we have said shows up. This dimension is where we try to situate symptoms commanded by knowable unconscious truths. When a word shows up where it shouldn't, and repeatedly so, week after week, you might say, there's a symptom. What does it mean? What is the dimension of this utterance? Here, notice, you're focused on what is said, a word choice, sister instead of Mr., deli instead of belly, or vice versa. We are focused here on the D, the said part. This, however, is not the only type of symptom that shows up in the clinic. Unknowable, unconscious truths exceed this dimension of the symbolic. An unknowable, unconscious truth eludes lexical capture at every turn, and more broadly, I'd say the symbolic as well. Unknowable, unconscious truths do not traffic in symptomatic saids. They instead traffic in symptomatic sayings. And here I'm marking a very precise distinction that Lacan starts to trace out at the end of Seminar 19b or worse, fully spells out, however, in Lecture D, the forgetful said. It's a terrific piece from this period. You may not have read it. A lot of people haven't. I would encourage you to take a look at this essay, Lecture D. There are English, French, lots of different language translations out there for you. And if you need help with it, I have an entire free lecture series, a reading guide that just walks you through this important essay from Lacan's later period, Lecture D. It's available on YouTube. There are transcripts available. You can find this thing in a lot of different places. Check out the archive on Lectures on Lacan, and you'll see it. This essay is crucial because Lacan introduces this distinction between the said and the saying. The said is a lexical word choice, one made by your unconscious in the case of the symptom. The saying, though, is a lived, embodied, corporal speech event. It is the act and fact of saying. If you close your eyes and put your pen down, but leave your ears open, just like St. Augustine's friend at the gladiatorial games, what you will hear is an act and fact of saying. The live event, though from very far away, of me speaking. Here, in the realm of the saying, the focus is not on what is said when the analysand speaks, but rather on the lived, embodied act of saying that the analysand inhabits. We are not looking at speech effects. Instead, we are looking at speech events. And I'm using that word event technically. Here, in the field of the saying of a symptom, we are not looking at the word sister. Instead, we are noticing what your tongue does when you say sister. It could be the lisp. Every time you say sister, your tongue comes out and now you have a lisp. You know how sometimes people talk with their S's and they have a little lisp where their tongue comes out? It has to do with how it sounds when the analysand says sister. What if every time they speak of their partner, their voice gets quieter? What if every time they speak of their father, their delivery gets slower, their words slow down, and they're more punctuated? There's what we call a controlled enunciation. It's something that people often do when talking to children or someone who they deem has a mental disability. Do you understand what I just said? It is time for bed. Go brush your teeth and then do not come out of your bedroom unless someone is dying. Sweet dreams. You know what I mean? So this controlled enunciation, what if the analysand starts to punctuate each word whenever they talk about their father? If all you are focused on is what they have said, you miss the way in which they are saying it. Do you see the distinction here? Knowable unconscious truth keeps us focused on what is said. Unknowable unconscious truth, however, produces symptoms that we can only attend by studying how someone says whatever it is they're saying. For Lacan, these are fundamental distinctions. The question is not what does the symptom mean, it's what does it mean to say the symptom. That's a direct quote from Seminar 22, top of mind for me. To give this to you a little more scholarly, I would say this. The word in French that Lacan uses for the said is dit. You heard me say D. The dimension of the symbolic, where things are said. The word he uses for saying, however, is dire, D-I-R-E. It's a totally different word, and it points to the act and fact of saying, not what does it mean. The question is now, notice how it shows up. Notice how it sounds. Notice how it appears. In sum, I think this leaves us with two clinical and conceptual questions. The first question that we can ask of symptomatic events: what do they mean? When we ask the question of what a symptom means, what we're asking after is knowable unconscious truth. Here, we're looking for a way to plug the hole in the symbolic. Envision, for instance, you're walking along a beach and you see a mossy, shattered ship's mast washed up. This is what is said. It is the mast of a ship, or at least part of it. And the work then becomes a meaning-making exercise where you envision not the piece of the mast, but the full mast of this ship. not the mossy fragment, but the polished white complete mast of a ship. You also would imagine the ship to which that mast used to be attached. Maybe it's a sailboat and it's out in the sea doing whatever boats do at sea. And then along comes a storm. Call it a trauma. And it devastates the ship. It breaks the ship. It shatters the ship. It breaks the mast. And 6 months later, a fragment from that ship and all the lives upon it washes up on your beach. We can take this symptom, and with the analysand, we can eventually return to the shipwreck and come to terms with it, bring meaning to it. However, these are not the only symptoms that wash up on your clinical shore. Which brings us to the second clinical and conceptual question that I want to leave you with. Every symptom begs this second question when we ask simply, what does it mean? There's another question that has to be asked of every symptom. How does this symptom defy all questions of meaning? How does this symptom elude lexical capture? How does it elude conscious knowledge? Here, this question, this second question, always begged by the first, puts us on the path of unknowable unconscious truths and treats whatever has washed up on the shore not as a signifier of some lost primal event, but instead as a figure of the real, not a signifier that operates according to symbolic logic, but a figure of impossibility that indexes the real. That is a different question. And for Lacan, ultimately, this is what psychoanalysis does. It holds a place for the real. It looks at symptoms not just for their meaning, but for the parts of them that remain meaningless, that can't be made sense of. So I would invite you, when the shattered mossy ship mast washes up on your rocky beach, to ignore the mast and listen instead to how the waves wash over all of the polished pebbles beneath it. The sound that a wave makes when it washes up on a rocky beach and all the rocks, by the propulsion of the wave, start to churn together. Not the sound of tide on sand, but the tide that washes up on a rocky beach, and you can hear all the stones rolling together. Stones that used to be edged, carved, perhaps even enciphered, now polished clean, only emitting the sound of rock upon rock. Solve for that. Tell me what that means. Tell me what the rock polished over thousands of years means. This is a different question. It asks after a different part of the symptom, and it puts us on the path to that second part of unconscious knowledge, the part that cannot be known. How to deal with this how to come to terms with what can't be come to terms with. This is the ultimate clinical and conceptual goal of Lacanian psychoanalysis. I'll stop there. I know you got a ton of questions, and I'm eager to discuss this with you. There's a lot more to be said, but I think this is a good stopping place. Thanks for being here, everyone.
Okay, so you can either raise your hands or you can write your questions in the chat box and we will take that up. So anybody who wants to ask a question, they can just simply raise their hand or use the chat box. Okay, I think Siddharth has a question.
Hi,
And
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yes.
you, Siddharth.
Sorry, I'm just in a bit of transit, so I'm not on video. Hi, sir. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. Just wanted to ask that how should one approach Lacan in terms of learning or reading? Should it be done chronologically through seminars? Is there someone who you recommend to read first before coming to Lacan, except Freud, of course, or any other way that comes to you?
That's such a good question. I arrived at Lacan late in my career, and there were lectures on Heidegger, there were lectures on Kierkegaard, there were lectures on Kant, well before there were lectures on Lacan. I think for reading Lacan, it's very useful to have read some in the history of Western thought. I think that's true. I think, however, it is also useful to have studied Eastern religion and philosophy as well. But that's not necessary. The only thing you need to understand Lacan is stubbornness. You need to be able to stick with it. This is the only difference between someone who understands Lacan and someone who doesn't. The former is not more intelligent than the latter. In fact, if you ask me, they're stupider than the latter. So stupid that, like a mule, they just keep treading out the grain. So I would think that what is required to read Lacan is stamina, willpower, and a certain type of stupidity. You really have to go in there and just be like, okay, half of what he says is going to be weird and wonky, and I'm probably not going to get it. And you have to be willing to let go of a paragraph. You have to be willing to read Lacan and say, okay, whatever that was, I will now proceed to the next paragraph. But now we get to the mulish part. And this is the difference between someone who gets Lacan and someone who doesn't, in my limited experience. When you reach the end of the essay, when you reach the end of the seminar, you go back and you read it again. And when you return to the paragraph that you skipped, you read it again and you ask yourself, can I still skip this paragraph? Or is there something here? There are paragraphs in Lacan that I still skip. I find the seminars incredibly useful. And I think that it's useful to have a companion with you. That is every bit what lectures on Lacan is designed to be. So that you can read, I don't know, the first few chapters of Seminar 11, and then go watch the first couple of lectures in our series on Seminar 11. That kind of guides you and walks you through this stuff. I do not think that it is helpful to read secondary scholarship on Lacan, even though I fully recognize that the work I do and that I produce at Lectures on Lacan is a secondary source. However, most secondary scholarship on Lacan is wrong. I've earned the right to say that. It is very unfortunate, but the list of precise and loyal and accurate commentators on Lacan is very, very short. So, for instance, you all have probably books on your shelves by my friend Bruce Fink. Bruce is a terrific reader of Lacan. He's very good. And he does a terrific job of bringing Lacan into the clinic and helping psychotherapists of all kinds make use of some of Lacan. However, Bruce oversimplifies many of Lacan's most difficult and important clinical and conceptual insights, in my view. But I still think that Bruce is incredibly useful. My advice to you in terms of reading Lacan, approaching Lacan, is work with the seminars, stick with it. Lacan is a recursive thinker. He's an organic thinker. He changes his mind. He develops new thoughts. So to be in the flow of thought with Lacan is what it means to be a Lacanian. People often ask me, what does it mean to be a Lacanian? The only thing it means is that you read Lacan. And to read Lacan is a verb, always in the infinite tense. You have to keep with it. You cannot just read one thing, jump in, and think that you get it. This is one of the dilemmas that Colette Soler does a really good job of pointing out. So much of Lacan's work is arriving at little mathemes and formulas that serve as mnemonic devices so folks can remember what it is he's saying. That Borromean knot that you saw on the screen, that's a mnemonic device. That's there to help you remember all the complexities of Lacan's later thought, such that in the clinic you could simply draw those Borromean rings and recall all of these things. It's like a little map, a little cheat sheet. But the dilemma is that people then get these cheat sheets or these sayings like the unconscious is structured like a language. And they say these over and over again. They have no idea what that means, but it's a catchphrase. And that's the dilemma. To work with Lacan is to abandon the catchphrases and be in the woods with him, walking. And it is a long walk through the woods. That's the important part. Most people quit long before they are able to have some insight. So be stupid, be stubborn, and don't stop.
Thank you.
Okay, I think Ian was next. So Ian, you can go ahead. And then Pulkit can follow up.
Hi, Dr. McCormick. Thank you so much for a very entertaining and poetic lecture. Okay, you can hear me? Yes, very good. So
Yeah.
I'm so interested about this idea of the said and the saying, and the saying being around the gap, the real, that which resists enunciation. At the same time, it seems that that gap is where language wants to accumulate. And the thing that came to mind when you were speaking to it was the idea of, well, isn't this what poets or artists would do? Sitting there on your beach, hearing the sound of those stones, that might sponsor a poem. But it also might sponsor what we call madness. So I'm curious to, in some ways, working with the said, working with this fragment, this clue, and then finding a meaning almost becomes somewhat of a defensive thing of like, okay, we've ticked this box, we put it here, but the really fascinating thing is to keep being drawn to that. Almost what comes to mind is that black hole of the real. And as soon as I use black hole, I've tried to attach some sort of meaning signifier to it. But so there's that. Also, in the context of this call, and I don't know the Bhagavad Gita well enough to say this, but I will hazard it. But there's in the story, Arjuna keeps asking for Krishna to reveal the absolute, and Krishna's saying, no, you can't. You would never be. It would blow you away. You couldn't handle it. And so I've always thought of that absolute as kind of the Lacanian real, in a sense of just. Anyway, I'm just throwing some of those things out there. So your thoughts, or anybody?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. That's fabulous. The first part I want to speak to is what the work of the poet is at the beach, the painter at the beach, the philosopher at the beach. These are artists. These are absolutely artists. I might also mention the scientist at the beach. A lot of the work that they do is very similar in this regard. Lacan tells us in the early 1970s, and I think you heard me say it during this little lecture as well, that language is what we try to know about Lalong. The way that Lacan sees language. Now imagine your dictionary or your holy book. You open it up and there are a limited set of stories, chapters, a book that begins with an introduction, has a conclusion. You've got alphabet at the front of the dictionary and zebra at the back. Lacan's point is that this is a very limited set of what speaking beings do with language. There's this whole other thing that they do with language, which is where they make words rhyme on accident. Words simply sound certain ways. And so for Lacan, this is a far wider, vaster field. And the word he uses for this is Lalong. The reason why he's doing this is because he wants to have the word long, which is the French word for language, L-A-N-G-U-E, but he adds that little L-A in front of it so that it's la long, in order for it to have the la, 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 la aspect of it. He wants there to be a la, la, sing-song, melodic, nonsensical, the way a child sings as they play, the way children whisper as they play, the way that they sing in the shower, the way that your grandmother used to hum. Not a song. She's just making noise. I think this matters. What is the purr of the cat? For Lacan, this is the jouissance of the cat. What Lacan wants to capture with Lalong is the far more expansive field of homophony, of polysemy, of things that can't be captured in the dictionary. I think the tendency when we're at the beach and we pick up a stone or a piece of wood is we want to know, where did it come from? What does it mean? What does it tell me? So you walk and you pick up a stone and it has a single etch in it. Lacan talks about this. And you ask yourself, who put this mark in the stone? What hunter put this mark in the stone to mark their first kill? We wonder, we can't help but wonder what it means. What I'm trying to work us toward is a type of symptom that defies analysis, that causes meaning to break down, that eats away at meaning making. Now, if you've got ears to hear, you know that seminar 22, which is what I'm studying right now in lectures on Lacan, and what you all are welcome to join in on, precedes seminar 23. Seminar 23 is not on symptoms, it is on symptoms. Lacan at this point has to reinvent the symptom as an unanalyzable rock. The word for this becomes symptom. It's the part of the analysand's speech that defies interpretation. It's an entirely different word. It's not even the symptom anymore. That's where we are. That's where I wanted us to be in this thinking process, right on the verge of a symptom that cannot be analyzed, that cannot be made sense of, except in absentia. Which brings us to the black hole. Ian's comment about the black hole is so apt because it describes precisely how Lacan thinks. An astrophysicist cannot study a black hole. Period. Full stop. You can't see them. Their gravitational pull is so powerful, my understanding, that it swallows light. It doesn't emit anything to see. And you say, well, wait a minute. We do have astrophysicists that study black holes. How can they study it if it can't be seen? They study atmospheric turbulence around a black hole. The way that the black hole's gravitational pull starts to distort and manipulate light and other phenomena at the edge of the void it is. When Lacan says in Rhetoric that the goal of psychoanalysis is to hold a place for the real, he means that the goal of analysis is to study atmospheric turbulence around the various black holes of our lives. What is the subject? The subject is atmospheric turbulence around a certain black hole. Lacan often referred to the subject as a bag with a hole in it. That captures a lot of what's going on here. Let me be very clear about this, though. The hole in the bag that each of us is not the real. It is the name of the real. It is a figure of the real. This is a really important and really difficult thing to remember. Experiences of impossibility, of holes that can't be closed, of wounds that can't heal. This is not the real. These are among its figures. Experiences of impossibility bring us to the doorstep of the real. But nobody has ever crossed that threshold. There's nothing beyond that threshold. In fact, that is precisely what's beyond it, nothing. I think the answer to the question of why the absolute can't be presented is because there's no such thing as an absolute to be presented. That is the real. Or at least a figure of it. This is how I name it for you. There's no there. There's nothing to give. I have no absolute to give. The absolute is the basic fundamental fantasy, that there is one thing, one truth that could be given if the gods would just allow it. The real is what we call the impossibility of any such thing. There is no absolute to be given. Real is what we describe, the field in which the absolute doesn't exist. I say this because it's a tricky thing, but just remember this. The place that we hold for the real in analysis is inevitably an encounter with castration, with limitation, with constraint, with the fact that we can't ever be complete, whole, absolute, singular, and one. The real is what's on the other side of that. Like I said, impossibility brings us to the doorstep. Nobody has ever walked in. You can't. There's nothing in which to walk. That is the real. Okay. Ian, two terrific questions in one. I absolutely cherish comments like that. Thank you.
I think Pulkit can go next and then follow it up by Suk.
Hi, Samuel. I hope I'm audible enough. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think it was a very wonderful lecture. I will also admit that it was difficult to follow you, but what I've understood is that in Lacanian thought, a symptom is not a medical sign. It is not a medical sign of dysfunction, but rather a signifier or something the patient cannot see. But I'm just wondering, what does it signify? If it's not a symptom, what does the symptom signify? And how does Lacanian psychotherapist or psychoanalyst help the patient?
Yeah. I think I follow your question. I'm not sure I understood everything. I think maybe we're both difficult to hear each other. And I think that is a very good illustration of the answer to this question. I think that in psychoanalysis, when it's a Lacanian psychoanalysis, there's a certain amount of humility that comes with it, which is why it's so ironic when you encounter a Lacanian who seems to have all the answers and never wants to shut up about it. I think that for Lacan, the clinic is a place of co-present encounters with another body that you could kill, another body that you could fuck, another body that you could reach out and hug, but none of that happens in the clinic. The clinic is a face-to-face environment. It is not on Zoom. It is not through Google Meet. The clinic is a lived, embodied encounter in real time where anything could happen. You could show up with a gun and shoot your analyst. They are open to that when they meet with you. And guess what? There's a sound machine in the waiting room that would prevent anyone from hearing you murder them. But you do not bring a gun and you do not murder them. You do not even touch them. You walk in, you sit down, and you talk. Lacan's clinic is a dangerous space in which people care for each other. Lacan's clinic is also a space where sometimes I don't understand what you said, where a lot of times you don't understand what I'm doing. Lacan's clinic is a place of humility. Part of what we're trying to do in a conversation like this is to come to an understanding of life in and beyond the clinic that leaves room for things that just don't make any sense. There's an old Delphic maxim. You have probably heard it before. In the Western tradition, it goes, know thyself. The Delphic oracle said, know thyself. And for many people, they think this is what psychoanalysis is about. I go to therapy, I come to some sort of an enlightened, conscious knowledge of myself. Not if your analyst is a Lacanian. If your analyst is a Lacanian, you end your treatment by recognizing that there are certain parts of you that cannot be understood, that do not make sense. There is a limit to the hystericization of the analysand. If you want to know what an interminable analysis is, it is this. It is where the surplus enjoyment of knowing thyself never runs out. Every week, the analysand shows up with a new dream, a new slip, a new symptom to study and come to terms with. And they never stop getting off on this epistemological process of knowing themselves. The end of analysis is not really very dramatic. Bruce Fink likes to say that if it doesn't end with them storming out and slamming the door, he didn't do his job right. I don't think that's quite right. Yeah, he likes to be cussed at the end, because he fundamentally gets that at the end of an analysis, the analyst is shit. The analyst is trash. The analyst can be thrown away, and that's good. In the beginning of an analysis, the analysand treats the analyst as a god. You are the subject supposed to know. Tell me what's wrong with me. If it goes well at the end, the analyst is an abject piece of trash. And the analysand says, I don't need you anymore. This is worthless. It's not, I'm paying you how much money for this? Not worth it to me. I don't need this. This is bullshit. I can't believe we're still talking about my dreams. What the fuck is this? There's cursing. Apologies for the curse, but that is precisely what's going on. The analyst gets thrown away along with the treatment. That's success. But there's also something less dramatic that happens at the end. There's a decline in the analysand's enjoyment of their symptoms. I no longer get off on talking about this. I keep having this, I just can't, I don't know what to do with all this. At the end of an analysis, you are okay, comfortable with not knowing what to do about certain parts of your life. You recognize that there are parts of your life that will remain a black hole. That's the humility that comes with a Lacanian psychoanalysis. And guess what? Your analyst also recognizes that about themselves and you and the treatment. There are parts of this that aren't going to work out. That is an encounter with the real. The real for Lacan is what's not working out. And when you can sit with what's not working out, you're at the end of analysis, but you're at the beginning of a love of self that allows you to finally encounter love for another. To love another is to be able to sit with their black hole. To sit with the parts of them that don't make sense to you or them. To allow them to not make sense. All too often, we expect every part of our relationship to somehow be able to be talked about. No, there are parts of you that can't be spoken. There are parts of them that can't be spoken. And there are parts of your relationship that never are going to sync up. We have a bumper sticker for this. There is no such thing as a sexual relationship. All that means is that you plus them is never going to equal oneness, perfect union, and perfect harmony. To be with yourself and to be with others is to be alongside things that don't make sense. So I think this great question, not all of which makes sense to me, is one that puts us right on point with the end of a Lacanian psychoanalysis. To hold a place for the real is to ultimately be able to hold, as in hug, embrace, cherish, and love the parts of self and other that just don't work. Love for Lacan is a love of incapacity. It's a love of impotentiality. Hear me now, people. Love for Lacan is a love of weakness. And by weakness, I mean castration. Next question.
And then Sukh, and then Soumya can go after Sukh.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Hi. Hi, Samuel. Like, really had a good time listening to you. I might take a minute to just get all the bits together for my question. Actually, I was wondering, as soon as we try to put something in categories like known and unknown, and suddenly things and examples come up which will sort of defy their categorization. I was thinking of, like, inside my head, I can sing a song a certain way, um, but I can't really sound it out, or like I can't really vocalize it. And that kind, but there's still a kind of hearing happening inside the head. There's almost like a voice inside the head, but that kind of same vocalization is not reproducible for me. And something like that, when those categories are being sort of defied of, because if it's just the eye which is the known and the ear which is the unknown, I'm having it difficult to place that a certain kind of pluralism, like of or known and unknown, starts to happen. And I was wondering, in when that kind of a thing happens with me, it's kind of ecstatic almost. I want to have more questions, to be more curious about the world and have the thing. But I'm wondering when that happens within a collaborative process, within a therapy room. And the symptom, from what I'm understanding, is something within the unknown. And so often that happens that my mother tongue is Punjabi. We pronounce no a very different way than someone speaking English or Hindi would sound it out. So my listening of it is very much different. Like there's no quotient to it that I'm listening to it the way. So, and we're still saying that the symptom is on the unknown, and it's like the unconscious, not my unconscious, but the someone like particular person's unconscious, that it almost seems like I am carrying it for them. Like, who gets the agency in the process? Because symptoms largely, like coming out of Lacan also, symptoms, like as defined from a very medical standpoint, symptoms, there's a lot of agency being taken away when symptoms are just being put on you. Or you do this, and this is the symptom, this is the behavior, and it's being labeled. So I'm just wondering, how do we, like, who has the agency when that kind of pluralism and that kind of, especially in the collaborative process, starts? I hope I make sense.
That's a great question. It reminds me again of the Lebanese psychoanalyst I mentioned to you, who on Friday indicated to me that the agency in his clinic is the unconscious, and not his as much as the analysand's. By simply repeating what the analysand has said, choosing the words, but choosing from among those pronounced by the analysand, this psychoanalyst has faith that the agency of the unconscious will be felt, will be pronounced, will eventually come through. So I think the trick is to allow the agency of the unconscious to come through. Now, let me just say something more about this to complicate it a little bit, because I get the sense, Suk, that this is something that you're very good at doing, is having two categories and finding a third element that doesn't fit in any. Perfect. The agency of the unconscious is structural. It is a structural agency. And I say that because typically in Western social thought, they think of structure and agency as two different things. Marx is one of the first great thinkers to realize that structure is agency. And I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind here. The agency of the unconscious is structural. Now, you can hear that and think, well, that means that the agency of the unconscious is linguistic, because for Lacan, structure equals language. Language is the basic structure of human being. But I'm saying something a little bit more than that. And the reason why I'm thinking of this is because in your question, you spoke of the songs that sometimes populate your mind. And you said that you have an ecstatic experience in these moments. And sometimes even in the clinic, maybe have an ecstatic moment. This ecstasis, which is the origin of the word ecstasy, is very important here. In the Greek, ekstasis means to be standing stasis outside ek. Hence the word exit. Think about this. A K looks a lot like an X if you think about it. All you have to do is straighten. An X is just a crooked little K. You just got to take your X and straighten those legs up a little bit, right? You see what I'm saying? Yeah, the X is a K that walks with a limp. And so if you think about this, exit takes its origin from ek, meaning out in the Greek. So exit, to exit out. Standing outside oneself is the basic understanding of ecstasy. This is how we are relative to the unconscious. there's always something, some part of us that is outstanding relative to the ego, relative to consciousness. And that is the field of the unconscious. It is an inconsistency that stands apart from us. So I want to ask you then another question and then immediately answer it. If we have the ego and then an ecstatic structural beyond that we call the unconscious, beyond the ego's ability to control, an agency that operates in spite of the ego, what do we need in order to maintain these two categories, ego and unconscious? There has to be a third, irreducible difference between them that is neither ego nor unconscious. This is the structural part, and this is the most important part. For Lacan, he says this explicitly in Seminar 21, if you want to look it up. The work that he does requires always that we count to 3. If all you're counting to is 2, ego and unconscious, 1 and 2, you're missing the important third element, which is the differential relation between the ego and the unconscious. Now, if you've seen my lectures, you know that one of the examples I like to use is this pen and the wall behind it. In order for this pen to appear on your screen as distinct visually from the wall behind it, in the foreground and the background, the figure and the ground, a 1 and a 2, there has to be a minimum irreducible line or division between the pen and the wall. If there were not a difference between them, you wouldn't see the pen or the wall. There'd be no foreground or background. For Lacan, this third element between the two is the most important part, because this is the opening or the difference that names the real. The real is what is signaled by the irreducible division between any two. Call it a relationship between the parts of you that don't make sense and the parts of me that don't make sense. The parts that will never make sense together, there's an opening, a gap, a hole in our bag. This hole is a name of the real, a figure of impossibility. So the agency of the unconscious is structural. But what is at stake in that reading of the unconscious as a structural ecstatic place relative to the ego is neither the ego nor this ecstatic place, but the irreducible third between them. That is the place we hold for the real. I'm happy to keep trotting out examples of this, but you could also just return to our lecture series on Seminar 20 forward, where I really start spelling this stuff out. What is a woman? She is the one, some of whose enjoyment can be understood, but not all of whose enjoyment can be understood. She is the some and the not all, but also the difference between this some and not all. Between every two for Lacan, there is an irreducible third. In his early thought, we called that little a. Objet A is the minimum irreducible distance or difference between any two entities that allows them to appear distinct. We label it little a. Now, in his later thought, which is where I've coached you today, we call it simply the non-rapport. It's where things don't add up. It's where things don't work out. It's the crack in the sidewalk that divides it into two. But that crack is neither the one nor the other. Just think about this for a second. The sidewalk has a crack in it. The crack divides the sidewalk into two. a left side and a right side. To which side does the crack belong? Neither. The crack in the sidewalk is neither part of the left-hand side or the right-hand side. It is a third element that doesn't belong to the either left or right. This, for Lacan, is what is at stake for him in his thought. Fundamentally, it is about always finding his way to that irreducible third and trying to formulate it. He did it for 25 years. It's the same work. Only a mule could carry that weight. I see
Okay,
more raised hands.
Yes, Professor McCormick, do you think that we will be able to accommodate all of the questions?
Of course we
have 5
will.
questions. Okay, great. So Soumya can go next and Mariam can follow after that, and we will stop after Anne.
Okay.
So Soumya, go ahead.
Hi, Professor Samuel. That was a brilliant, very insightful lecture. And I got to learn so much from it. And I am actually doing my PhD on this concept of neurosis. And I'm looking at neurosis not simply as a psychosomatic disorder, but as a sign and a register of historical suffering. And I'm using Theodor Adorno's intervention in Freudian psychoanalysis, especially through his work on social psychology, wherein he says that therapy alone cannot be a corrective measure. So I was wondering if I could use Lacan as well, especially his work on the unconscious and the significance of the symptom, because I'm also sort of exploring the same ideas in texts like Sartre's Nausea, Camus' Stranger, and Kafka's Metamorphosis. Again, these symptoms which come up, the unknowable, almost enigmatic and incomprehensible aspects which defy interpretation, and they could yet also, like you correctly suggested, give insights into the real suffering of modern existence. So perhaps this hidden potential of the negative and the unknown realm, or what you call the jouissance, can be explored through critical theory. So do you think that Lacanian psychoanalysis can also be employed in a similar fashion to assist critical theory and also the problem of modern existence, especially suffering?
I do. I think, however, there is a danger. And forgive me, but I think that this is one of the dangers that comes when you begin your approach to Lacan with Slavoj Žižek. Slavoj Žižek is not a Lacanian. He is a post-German Enlightenment critical theorist. Now, what does that mean? It means that his primary training is in everything in the critical tradition that comes after Kant. Kant invents critique. Hegel perfects it. Kierkegaard undermines Hegel, and Marx inherits the entire tradition. And now you can go up into the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory. These are also inheritors of that tradition. Žižek is fundamentally trained in all of this critical theory. Lacan is the side note, and there's a dilemma that comes with this. Critical theory, more often than not, operates with a certain suspicion. Behind every statement, there is a hidden truth. So Nietzsche looks at claims of truth, and behind them he sees power. Marx looks at existing social structures, and behind them he sees capital. Freud, in the critical tradition, we look at speech events, and behind them we see sexual, insidious, unconscious truths. This mastery of suspicion that critical theory brings to psychoanalysis hinders our ability to read Lacan. Why? Because what Lacan brings to psychoanalysis is not suspicion, but fidelity. The speech of the analysand is not a lie, the truth of which hides behind. The speech of the analysand for Lacan is a sacred text to be cherished, studied carefully, in which truth is hidden, not concealed. It's like a puzzle. Does the crossword puzzle lie to you? Is it a liar because it doesn't show you the words? No, it's a puzzle. And we treat crossword puzzles almost religiously. We mark them so carefully. We erase little letters. We fold the paper just right so that we can work on the puzzle. We practice puzzle solving every single morning. Some of you wake up in the morning and look forward to nothing more than the New York Times puzzle. I know lots of people who do this every single morning. That is a ritual that brings with it a certain faith. Trust that there is indeed meaning there. That's a different approach to Lacan. So I think, yes, you can bring Lacan and critical theory together, and you can use that to understand neurosis as a series of signs and registers of suffering. But beware suspicion. Lacan is not a critical theorist. He is a man of faith. His God is the unconscious. He believes in the unconscious. He trusts that a treatment will work out if given enough time. I remember giving a lecture in Brazil, and well, in a format like this. I was at home here in San Francisco, but my voice was in Brazil. And someone asked about what the goal of an analysis was. And one of my colleagues who was on the call, brilliant psychoanalyst who always is with us in lectures on Lacan, if you want to come meet with her, Fernanda Samaco, she said, my goal is very simple. It's simply for the analysand to come back next week. She has faith that if the analysis is just allowed to run its course, the unconscious will do all the work. It's not that the analysand is lying when they show up, even if, like Zizek, they purport to fabricate all of their dreams. You can lie, you can tell the truth, whatever you say in analysis, at some level, it doesn't matter. The unconscious will find a way. I say all this, though, with the caveat that I am speaking of neurotic subjects. In dealing with psychotics and even with perverts, there's a different approach. But in dealing with the classic neurotypical maladaptive neurotic subject, which it sounds like is the subject of your dissertation, Soumya, I think that Lacan would be extremely useful in this regard. I would just say leave room for faith.
Sure. Thank you
And
so
I'm
much.
not a religious man. Trust me, this is not me. I'm not religious in this regard. I believe in
Yes.
the unconscious. And that's what Lacan would bring. I think if you read Freud too, you would get something like that as well. You can read The Interpretation of Dreams, Freud's big breakout book when he was in his 40s, and you see him cherishing his dreams. There's a lot of self-analysis in The Interpretation of Dreams. And you see Freud really carefully and delicately working with his dream images. He's not tearing them apart to see what's behind them. He's interpreting them the way a hermeneut of faith would approach the New Testament. This is why you know the name Saint Augustine. Why is Saint Augustine a saint? Because he came up with a new theory for interpreting the New Testament, and that's called hermeneutics. It wasn't a suspicious endeavor. It was an attempt to sit with the parts of Jesus's teaching that make sense and also the parts that don't. Don't forget, there's always an anagogic aspect of scripture. You could say the same about the analysand's speech. There's literally what they're saying, but there's also something beyond the letter, something in the letter that is beyond it, that can't be made sense of. The anagogic, if you run this hermeneutically. So, Soumya, I think there's a lot you could do. I'm happy to follow up with you later and give you some more specific insights and texts if you need it.
Definitely. Noted.
Yeah. Who else is out there has a question or a comment? I'm happy to discuss.
Mariam, and then Omi, and then Dipanshi, and then Anne.
Hey, am I audible?
Yes, we can
Yes,
hear you.
Anne.
Okay, so thanks a lot for this very informative section. And I found it quite insightful and a bit novel, especially since I'm also a master's student in philosophy. I'm learning cognitive science and some philosophy of Wittgenstein. So my question is, with regards to the two kinds of unconscious knowledge, and I was wondering if there could be some experiences that are knowable by unconscious, but we're not able to describe it. Like, for example, certain esoteric experiences, we know it from our unconscious mind, but we may not be able to describe it. So where does this come in the two categories given by Lacan? Thank you.
Oh, that's such a great question. I think that this question, which is extremely good, it points to a mysticism in Lacan's thought. And he's very explicit about this when he turns to the topic of sexuation, masculine and feminine, his theory of sexuation. He explicitly has room in his psychoanalytic theory for the mystics. In fact, Lacan says he himself is among these mystics, St. John of the Cross and Jacques Lacan of the Podium. The mystic is someone who experiences a type of enjoyment that can be felt but not said, that can be known but unpronounced. When Lacan says in Seminar 22 that a woman is a symptom, this is what he means. She is a social symptom, because when she shows up with access to a mode of enjoyment that is beyond the phallic function, beyond the ability to say and pronounce, she shows up in a way that troubles the entire order of things, where we presume everything can be said and pronounced. So for Lacan, this experience of enjoyment that can be felt but not said is one that troubles social relations. It troubles the speech of the analysand. This is also why for Lacan, the first great thinker of the symptom is not Freud, but Marx. He's explicit about this again and again and again. It is Karl Marx who first understood the meaning of the symptom, not Freud. Marx understood that the proletariat, the subaltern, is the symptom. The 99% is the symptom. We are the symptom. So I bring this up because I always like ending with different things than we've discussed. This question puts us on the path to sexuation, because for Lacan, the feminine subject, the subject sexed feminine, it doesn't matter what your anatomy is, I know male subjects who enjoy as feminine subjects. Femininity for Lacan is a mode of enjoyment. It has nothing to do with what's between your legs. It has only to do with how you enjoy. I want to end because it's another related area of study that I think you should check out here. The mystic is a feminine subject who experiences something, some ecstatic enjoyment that they know they experience, but are unable to put into words. They just can't explain it to you. And I want to be really clear about this. I believe mysticism of this sort is actually quite common. I am powerless to tell you how much I love you. Love means I can't say it all. I can't write it all. When I go to the beach as a poet, I don't just write about the waves on the sand. I use that as an opportunity to try and come a little bit closer to expressing in my card for you on your birthday just how much I love you. This is a very common experience of love. There is always more than I can say. And if you don't believe me, all that means is that you haven't had a child yet. Because I'm not just talking about the love you have for your partner, I'm talking about a parent's love for a child. Both are bottomless. I remember my daughter when she was a little girl. She was worried that I would run out of love, that I wouldn't have enough, that if I loved someone else, there wouldn't be love for her, as though there was only one bucket. And I tried to explain to her that my heart has all of these parts. I have an area that has love for the neighbor. I have an area that has love for my partner. I have an area that has love for my daughter. And they're all fundamentally bottomless. This is how Lacan conceives of love. This is also why he says the truth is impossible. You just can't say it all. There's not enough time. Why else, in Western courts, do you need to swear upon the Bible, hand on the holy text, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Why do you need God's help to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You need God's help because it's impossible to tell the whole truth. And if you don't believe me, tell me everything that you have done today. Tell me everything you have smelled today. Walk me through all of the smells in your day. Walk me through all of the sounds you've heard in the last hour. Your pen on the page, the rustling of paper, the neighbor upstairs, the cat's purr. The list goes on, and I'm just talking about the last hour. Now imagine you're in analysis and you're asked to talk about your childhood. Not even the parts you have access to could ever be fully, completely, wholly told. This, for Lacan, is what's at stake in the truth. Limitation, constraint. You can't say it all. This is also, someone just asked, is the mystic a hystericized subject? Not necessarily. I would say, in fact, to be less technical about it, I'd say this is one of the most unfortunate ways that we treat mystics, is we say that they're hysterical. We treat them as hysterics. But for Lacan, remember, the discourse of the hysteric is oriented towards knowledge. It's fundamentally oriented towards knowledge. Socially speaking, the hysteric is oriented towards the master's lack of knowledge. But in the clinic, the hysteric interrogates their symptoms in order to arrive at their unconscious truth. It's all about trying to arrive at a knowable unconscious truth. The mystic, though, is the one who says, there's a limit to this. There are parts of me, of my symptomatic life, that I can't explain to you, that are commanded by truths beyond my ability to know. That's what the mystic would say. And I wouldn't exactly correlate that with hysteria. The hysteric is interested more in your ignorance than in their own. That's a really important part about hysteria. The hysteric wants nothing more than someone who pretends like they know it all, so that they can then reveal that you, in fact, do not know it all. It is the master's ignorance that the hysteric enjoys. That's one way to read the discourse of the hysteric. But no, the mystic wouldn't necessarily fit into that discourse. In fact, I don't think that Lacan has a discourse for the mystic. There isn't one. Because the type of experience that the mystic brings to bear defies discursive reality. It can't be said. It doesn't lend itself to meaning. There are too many examples of this in the history of world religion. The mystic is the one who says, I can't tell you what it feels like. I really can't explain it. So instead, I'll give you a poem. So instead, I'll give you an axiom. All I can say is, please do not muzzle the ox that treads out the grain. So no, if you want to call that hysteria, I don't know, but I wouldn't. Great questions. I love how sometimes the chat also follows up and like adds to the question. You all are a very tremendous group. I'm so honored to be here. So many smart, considerate people. This is wild. Can we do this again in 2 hours? Take a break, have a sandwich, and then come back. Keep everyone up very late at night talking about this. My day just started, mind you. I could go for 10 more hours. But I know for some of you, perhaps it's bedtime.
Okay, I think next one was Omi. Omi, you can go ahead, and then Dipanshi can follow.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. I'm a master's student and I'm studying linguistics. And I very recently started reading Lacan's writings, and it's actually drew me. And I'm very thankful to have attended this session because it was really interesting for me and very new for me. So my question is, I'm very interested in stylistic analysis of the stream of consciousness text, written by various authors. And while I was reading it, and I was trying to do that, I start going very deep into those words, and I start thinking that, to what extent does the syntactic and lexical patterning in these stream of consciousness writings, it demonstrates Lacanian principles, and how do these linguistic features construct meaning beyond linear narrative logic? I mean, sometimes I feel that, there's a flow, and then I see that there's a break in that flow of that stream of consciousness, and the author is maybe trying to make up that stream of consciousness, and which is not how the previous sentence was. And I can see that flow, but I really don't know how to put it. And anything would you want to suggest, or any readings in this line? I would be very thankful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that the psychoanalytic concept that comes to mind most readily, and I'm sure half the people on this call have already thought this, so this isn't a big breakthrough, is free association. The classic Freudian pillar of psychoanalysis is free association. Not just a suspension of contradiction, but free association as just that. In the unconscious, there is no such thing as contradiction. Words jumble together. It's a sea of words. The unconscious is an island full of plastic trash floating in the sea. That's not a bottle out there. That is a fragment. It's a microplastic. It's a bit of a straw. It's a big jumble of things. There is no contradiction in the unconscious. And so to speak in a stream of consciousness way, to free associate, is to somehow be able to flow in that way, the way plastic flows in the sea, all on top of each other and mixing up. I think this is extremely difficult. I had a member of the Lectures on Lacan community in our Friday discussion bring this up. He's a Greek thinker engaged in a multi-year psychoanalysis with a Lacanian. And he says it is extremely difficult for him to engage in free association. He says every time, this is what he says on Friday to the whole group, lots of people, he says, every time I feel like I'm on the verge of just saying whatever comes to mind, I pause and I think about how my analyst is going to hear this. And so I do not say what is on my mind. I take that pause and I find some other way of saying it. Free association for some people is an indication that the analysand is at the end of the analysis. It is extremely difficult to engage in stream of consciousness speaking. In this case, free association, though, I would call it stream of unconsciousness. That is wildly challenging. Even in the dream, where the unconscious may have the most freedom to speak, it does not appear as nonsense. Dreams have images, and most of those images are familiar. Even when the ego sleeps, the unconscious does not simply express itself freely. It camouflages its messages. It tells you what it's trying to tell you while still allowing you to remain asleep. What do you call a dream in which the unconscious speaks without hesitation? It's called a nightmare. The nightmare is the dream in which the unconscious speaks without hesitation, without constraint. And what do we do when we have nightmares? We wake up. The ego wakes up. The censor wakes up and says, no more dreaming. We are now awake. Wow, let's never do that again. What we do instead, though, is we engage in speech that is patterned. We speak in ways that are patterned, that are based on little phrases, clusters of words. Speech for Lacan has this retroactive component that so many people have talked about, but it also has an anticipatory component, such that I can slow down with a sentence, and I bet you, many of whom don't have English as their first language, will still be able to guess what it is I am going to say next. Jack and Jill went up the hill. And we can guess what follows. There are certain words that come to mind as more likely to follow. This process, and linguistics hasn't quite touched on this yet, but it is upon us in a different field, the field of artificial intelligence. It's called stochastic reasoning. It's about probability prediction. The best person on this to read, by the way, is not a linguist. He's a post-Foucauldian named Ian Hacking. He wrote a book on the emergence of chance and another on the birth of probability. Probabilistic reasoning is where we guess which word is likely to follow the next. This is the basic structure of artificial intelligence today. The large language model, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're all based on stochastic reasoning. They are extremely good because well trained on human language use, such that they can guess the most likely next word to appear in a sequence. It's probabilistic reasoning. I bring this up because in this so-called stream of consciousness failure, where all we're doing is stochastically predicting the next word in a sequence, we still hallucinate. The models still hallucinate. They say completely absurd, ridiculous things. There's actually even a concern that when generative AI takes off, it will simply invent its own language. It will take all the languages on Earth, it will invent a new coding system that works for it that we have no idea what it means. It will come up with the next hieroglyphics. And that will be its language, not ours. But I bring this up because even in stream of consciousness writing, even in stream of consciousness speaking, it's oftentimes the error or the slip or the mistake that becomes the most significant thing. Not where your pen flows freely, but where your pen stops is where you get something indicative. In other words, stream of consciousness writing and speaking is most important when the stream stops flowing, when something disrupts it. Musically, we see this most significantly in improvisational style music. Jazz being the classic example, the American tradition of jazz music, especially of an improvisational sort. I remember a story, for instance, of the famous jazz trumpeter, you may have heard of him, Miles Davis. He was playing in a venue, and every time he blasted a certain note on his trumpet, a piece of metal in the back of the venue would vibrate and create this terrible noise for the audience. And they initially, during the sound check, tried to address it, tried to make the metal stop rattling. They couldn't. And so for the show that night, Miles Davis used every opportunity he could to hit the note and make that piece of metal part of the group, part of the band. His goal was to activate that metal. In other words, the error in his music, the piece of metal, now becomes the central part. This is what happens in psychoanalysis. I'm not interested in your stream of consciousness. I'm not interested in your perfect eloquence. I am not interested in the words that flow freely and easily. As a psychoanalyst, we are interested in what happens when the words stop flowing, when there's a break or a hallucination or a word that doesn't fit, like sister instead of mister shows up. That's what catches our attention. So I think stream of consciousness texts are fascinating for a psychoanalyst, but not for the same reason that they would be fascinating for a philosopher or a linguist. We would be more interested in where that stream is disrupted, where it stops flowing. In the AI models, this would be the moment of hallucination. I remember when ChatGPT told me that the first gay president of the United States was Pete Buttigieg. Now, for some of you that don't follow American politics, Pete Buttigieg never became president. But the model had this entire narrative built around Pete Buttigieg as the first openly gay president of the United States. I leaned into that fantasy so hard. What an enjoyable fantasy. That is what would interest us. Not the narrative that is true, but the one that is completely hallucinated. But at that, we pass over a bit into psychosis. Great question. I'm so happy to hear that you're in linguistics. Lacan is a terrific person. Read Saussure, then read Derrida, and then read Lacan. That's my suggestion for the linguists out there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dipanshi, go ahead.
Hi, Sam. It was a terrific lecture. And I have a two-part question, I think. We were talking about the unconscious and the symptom. I was struggling to make a link between the unconscious, which is characterized by spontaneity and surprise, and how do we link it to the symptom, which we talked about repeats itself and comes over and over again. And what does Lacan mean when he says the symptom is the etc. and etc. of the person? If you could talk a little bit about it.
Yeah. And when you say the et cetera, do you mean the ellipsis? The dot that we see? Is that what you're referring to? Okay, yeah. It's a really fascinating topic. I told you at the start that not every speech event is a Freudian slip, and not every Freudian slip is a symptom. This is part of what I'm getting at here. The question then becomes, what constitutes a symptom for Lacan? A symptom for Lacan is a Freudian slip that repeats. So it could be as simple as, more often than not, when you talk about your mother, you tend to have a little voice that you do for her. People will oftentimes do this when talking to their animals too, talking to their pets. They'll talk for their pets. There's a whole area of study that studies how pet owners communicate to veterinarians when they take their cats and dogs and birds and snakes to the vet. And they usually have a special voice that they use for their animal. So the vet walks in. It sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. The vet walks into the consulting room and says, "How are we doing today?" And the pet owner says, "I'm feeling a little bit sick. My foot hurts." "Oh, I'm just tired today and I don't know why." And the vet is talking to the cat. And the owner is speaking for the cat in a voice that is not their own. This, for Lacan, is how the unconscious speaks. He uses the Greek narrative tradition of the epos. You can see this in his 1956 Manifesto of Psychoanalysis, the function and the field, or the field and the function of speech and language in psychoanalysis. It's in Écrit. It's one of the best essays in there. He talks about the way that the unconscious speaks in an archaic voice, the way that analysans will throw their voice. When you talk about your dad, your pronunciation slows. When you talk about your mom, it quickens. When you speak of your sister, you have a lisp. What the analyst would be looking for as a Lacanian are speech patterns that repeat. Not exactly the same. That's the key part here. Very rarely will someone come in and have the exact same dream over and over again. No, what they'll have are variations on the same dream theme. And the dilemma there is that the analysand cannot find the common thread. They cannot find the common denominator for all their dreams. A symptomatic reading of their speech is one that says, you know what? In all of these dreams, I'm falling apart emotionally, physically, my clothing. I can't find my glasses. My ear falls off. It's not the same image in each dream, but the theme is similar. The theme is the same. That's what tells us it's a symptom. So the way that this works is the theme is repeated, but each image is different, surprising. So it's not just a plain repetition of the exact same thing again and again and again. This is not encore in that sense. It's not automaton, if you prefer Seminar 11. This is not just the idle repetition of something that allows a language to hold together. And by the way, you don't even see this in a language. A living language is one that people speak. And a living language is one that is constantly evolving because people start using terms differently. Like How about the numbers 6 and 7? 6, 7. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, how you doing today? 6, 7, man. I'm just, I don't know. My niece still can't explain to me what 6, 7 now means. I remember when my students here on the west coast of the United States in San Francisco, California, started using the word Riz, R-I-Z-Z. They tell me, yo, man, he got hella Riz. I said, Riz? What is this Riz? And they could explain. This is a new way of using the word charisma. We no longer say that somebody is charismatic. We say they got Riz. That is a new usage of an established English word, charisma. And it's one that proves that the English language isn't dead, because it evolves, and it evolves through change. Change requires a newness, new ways. And now Riz was the word of the year last year, I think, for Oxford. Or maybe it was Merriam-Webster. I forget who chose this one. Now it's an established word. So languages themselves also operate on the same principle. They require weird new ways of saying old established words. Otherwise, they die. There's nothing left to say if all the meanings of the words have all been settled and there's no more new words. Poetry dies. It passes like Latin into silence. Nobody speaks Latin anymore, unless you're a different type of man of faith. So I think the question of surprise and repetition is a really good one here. Thematically, symptoms repeat, even if the individual instances, in the sense of dream images, for instance, are different. We see a common thread. That would allow for a diagnosis of, oh, that's a symptom for this person, according to Lacan. I'll leave it at that and let you follow up if you would like to on this question, because I realize this is just the first part of what you said, but maybe it's enough.
Okay, time for our final question. Anne, you can go ahead. I hope Anne is with us. Okay, she just joined. Anne, you can go ahead with your question.
Oh yeah. My network is shit.
There you are, Anne. Hi.
Hi. So I have two backgrounds. One is sustainability and one is teaching. Can you hear me?
I think your voice is breaking a lot.
Yeah, I'm having trouble hearing. I'll tell you what, here's what we'll do. Why don't we take, Anne, why don't you type your question in the chat? Can you do that, or is it a long question?
Or maybe you can close your video, and that would help.
I would do.
You can just switch off your video. Yeah.
So Yema, you're so good. You know all the tricks. Okay, Anne, let's try again. Oh, I love a quiet moment.
And I think you unmute yourself rather than switching off your video. And we can't hear you, but we can see you. You have to switch off your video and unmute yourself.
Yes, that would help with your internet connection.
Now?
Oh, hello,
yes,
Anne. We can
Oh,
hear
thank
you,
you.
please.
Okay. I can't see my screen. Sometimes it disappears. So I have two backgrounds. One is sustainable development. This is how I found the meeting today. And the other one is secondary language teaching for English and German. And I visit Freud, Lacan, psychoanalysis, and I found there are many parallels. So one of them is when I started psychoanalysis, I couldn't speak clear at all. So this is sort of a miracle that you could probably hear me now quite clear in speaking. And as a language teacher, I found that many adults, when they learn a new language, they speak very unclear. They will do this because they're scared, so they will speak like that. And so what I started doing with adults is to use these, I think, as concept as la langue without noticing it, so that these unclear ways of speaking are actually from the unconscious. But I did this as a creative teaching technique, but they became very self-confident over time. These were for managers, and now they're also immigrants. And because of that observation, I started to develop more an interest in that sort of specific teaching technique. It has also a bit to do with engaging emotions. But this has led me at a conflict now where I do not know what is, for example, therapeutic practice, because I'm not a psychotherapist, not a psychoanalyst. And what was asked before is that Lacan says, what you just said is that it's only a symptom if it occurs very often. So if a student makes a mistake one time, it's not a symptom or I can't cure it. So that at this point, I feel like conflicted what is a cool teaching technique and how to promote it, but also when do I maybe already cure someone, and is this maybe good? For example, a student of mine, she will often say face in a mispronunciated way instead of history. So this has to do with she feels her face looks ugly. But she mentioned it now so often that to me this has become sort of symptom. But because she's also learning the new language with me, I start to feel overwhelmed or confused, or I do not know what specifically I offer. So it's don't have specific question, but I just wanted to share it. Yeah, what does it mean to work with the unconscious also in other fields, or because this is a psychosocial? So how can maybe someone not in the clinical context help people with the unconscious? So for example, some of my students, they bring in a dream. Sometimes it's very scary, sometimes it's not, but then I noticed, okay, there's immigrants and they have a really shit time most of the time. How can unconscious also be in other fields? Something like that. And thank you for your...
Yeah. Okay, Anne, that's terrific. And I love the perfect symmetry between the example that you bring and the fact that you had to turn off your camera in order to bring the example. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah. You had to rely on the voice alone in order to make your voice heard. There's a phrase in psychoanalysis that is relevant here. It's an old one. You've probably heard it before. Say it again, say it better. One thing that might happen in a Lacanian psychoanalysis is that the analyst would say, will you please tell me about that dream again? Do you know the dream you told me about 6 months ago? What's that one? How does it go again? Say it again, say it better. One thing that the analyst might be looking for there are differences in the telling of that dream. Now wait, when you told me that dream 6 months ago, the man in the dream had a mustache. Now you're telling me the story of the dream. The man does not have a mustache, or if he does, you didn't mention it in the second telling. So the analyst could be looking for differences in the telling of a story. That could be indicative, not so much what you say, but what you leave out in the second telling. Here is that ... Here is that omission. ... in the 18th century starts to become a sign for omission in a text. The ellipsis tells you that there's something else that could be included but is not there. That could be indicative. In other words, not what is said, but what is missing from what is said could be the indicator. This would apply, Anne, to any field of study that focuses on spoken discourse. Anytime speech is a centerpiece, the unconscious will be active. In the case, for instance, of language acquisition, as somebody, for instance, who struggled for years to read and speak German, one of your languages, I can tell you how often, by accident, it would seem, I would mispronounce a German word. For instance, most people don't even know what to do with the umlaut in your last name, Anne. Are you Anne Jost? Just? How do you say the umlaut? Not a lot of people know what to do with that. So I think it's really an interesting question, especially for secondary language learners. Learning a foreign language is like relearning language acquisition. It's a replay where you have to be humble and you have to think carefully about every little thing that you say. When you're fluent in a language, you can speak without thinking. When you are not fluent in that language, it is almost impossible for you to speak without thinking. You have to think constantly, which word am I going to choose? Am I conjugating it correctly? Will it come out okay? It's almost entirely overdetermined. I think one thing that you could do for foreign language learners is to help them loosen their tongues so that they can speak freely. Now, what might that mean? It could mean not focusing on words, but on sounds. Just focusing on all the vowels that can have an umlaut. Those are the two little dots above the O in Anne's last name. Just focusing on that sound. Let's put our mouth in the position that makes the sound that corresponds to an O with two dots above it. We're not saying a word. We're not trying to pronounce or conjugate a verb. We are just making sounds. I think this is terrific because how else does the baby learn to speak? What does goo goo gaga mean? Babies learn by first making weird sounds. And how do they make sounds? By activating mirror neurons when they see you make the same face. If you go to a baby and you go, that baby will intuitively, neurologically, it can make the exact same expression. When you smile at a baby and it smiles back, that doesn't mean it's happy. That is a neurological reaction that allows the baby to mimic with its face what it sees you doing with yours. Similarly, if you're in the line at the grocery store and there's a baby in front of you, I highly encourage you to try this. Make an angry face at that baby. When the parent isn't looking, look at that baby and go, now watch how that baby starts crying. It doesn't mean the baby is upset necessarily. The baby is just imitating what you've done with your face. It'll make everyone's experience at the grocery store more miserable. So I highly encourage you to try this. My point here, though, Anne, is that Lacanian psychoanalysis and this approach to the symptom that focuses on nonsense and things that don't have meaning could be really useful for teaching somebody a foreign language because it gets them out of their head and into their body. Let's just make the sounds. For instance, while learning Spanish, you have to learn to roll your tongue. Just learning how to do that can make a big difference. I cannot even imagine the sounds I would need to learn to speak Punjabi. I cannot even imagine the sounds I would need to learn to sound like a native Hindi speaker. Do you see what I mean? Okay. I say this just to emphasize that the body, not the mind, is what is central in Lacanian psychoanalysis.
Yeah, I had sort of sound-based language learning. So it would be because I would not be able to speak another accent. But if there's different cultures have the same ö, then via the ö, we could meet somewhere.
Let's see if that's true. Everybody at the same time, turn your mics on if Zoyema will allow it, and let us all pronounce the ö as our final vocalization here. Can we do it all together? Zoyema,
Yes, we
will
can.
you allow this?
Okay, I'm excited.
Okay, we
Everybody,
got.
please open your mics.
Okay,
At the
Anne,
count of
will you do it first just a few times so we can all hear how we're supposed to say that umlaut O?
Okay, so my last name is Joost, so it would be
Okay, everybody, 1, 2, 3. I totally messed that up. Okay, so you probably heard yours better than you could hear everybody else's on this
I will
call.
have a week-long inspiration now. Thanks, actually, a lot.
And Catherine Just. No, that's not right. That's not right at all. I think this is the start of things. This is where language starts. This is where analysis starts. Remember this. For Lacan, the first thing that occurs in analysis is not a word. It is a sound. There is no first word of analysis. The first word of analysis is a song. And it's always bird song. What you might otherwise reduce to noise. But don't forget what the medieval mystics thought when they looked out the window and saw the bird chirping on the branch. They heard the bird and asked, "What God do you want from me? What are you trying to tell me, God?" You walk through the park on a cloudy day and suddenly the sun breaks through, just as you're asking what to do with your life. What does it mean? What could it mean, the sound of waves crashing on smooth pebbles at the beach? These are Lacanian questions. These are the only Lacanian questions. What are you telling me, God? But don't forget, our faith is only to the unconscious. Thanks you all for being here. This has been very fun. I've learned a lot.
Okay. So I would like to extend a warm thanks to Professor McCormick on behalf of the entire Qafila Psychosocial Support and Research team, and for the kindness and time that he has shared with us today. We are grateful to you for the wonderful lecture and look forward to similar experiences with you together.